Is Kenya broke? You have heard words like illiquidity.
Is conceding that the country's economy is in a strained status, citing lack.
That the country's economy is in turmoil was an open secret. The man in
total public debt now stands at well over 6.5 trillion shillings.
The government expects to pay back nearly 700 billion shillings in domestic debt.
My name is Abraham Rugo, and I'm the country manager at the International Budget Partnership Kenya. Our work is to support and work with citizens in their different forms of organizing to engage with budgets at the national level and at the county level. And we do this by focusing on matters of transparency, matters of accountability, matters of how they participate, and most importantly, equity in distribution of resources. We got here largely by spending beyond our means. When you look at the last couple of years, every year we had a deficit that was increasing even when the revenue was not growing at the same level. And what that has meant is that we have to borrow for that. Even after we started with a deficit at the beginning of a financial year, within the year, we had deficits being revised upwards instead of being revised downwards. Normally, if you don't meet your revenue targets, what you would do, prudence will demand that you actually reduce your expenditure, but not adjust your borrowing limits for that. A case in point is last year, 2021-2022, when the budget was presented for the year 2022-2023 in Parliament. There was only a wiggle room of 400 billion. And the committee, the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly, actually tabled a report saying they must limit the deficit to 400 billion because that was the space. Instead of going by that, what happened is that the borrowing limit was revised upwards to 10 trillion. Because of that borrowing that was very heavy, a lot of it was commercial and short-term. And therefore it means that the payouts, the repayment, debt is the first charge. So the repayments have been very high, and especially in the year 2023-2024, and we'll talk more about that. The payments are fairly steep because you have first to pay interest payments, but then there are also principal payments. So when you think about PFM actors, it's important for us to appreciate that PFM, first of all, is a public finance management. It's a space that has got many actors. Of course, the key driver in that space is government. And there, the responsibility is shared largely between the national executive and the National Assembly, Parliament for that matter. The responsibility to make decisions, to prepare the budgets and whatever has been by the National Treasury. But their responsibility to approve and oversight that expenditure has been with the National Assembly. Between those two actors, there seemingly has not been a lot of concerted effort, especially in living within the commitments they have made. One key commitment that has been made was what we call fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation simply means that we are going to, over time, reduce the deficit. In other words, we are going to try as much as possible only have critical spending and necessary spending and try and live within our means. But based on what I've just explained earlier, when you look at Parliament has not been very firm, and even the National Treasury sometimes has gone completely out of the way in terms of living within our means. As for the other players outside, of course, civil society organizations, the media, a lot of them, including the work that we do at the IBP, has been to speak on these things. And year on year, from about 2016, we have submitted memorandums to the National Assembly, to the Treasury, to the Senate, raising these issues and saying, look here guys, by the projections we are having, it will get to a point where we will not be able to sustain ourselves, where we will not be able to meet our day-to-day expenses, because it means we will be paying so much in debt servicing. The international player and private sector the fact that they are the ones lending to government, it means that their hands in a way, in one way or another, are tied, because then they are more keen on being able to recoup their money. And that's why you see a lot of even private investors right now, we are having a higher subscription to treasury bonds than treasury bills than treasury bonds. The short term, people want to put in their money, make money, and get out of the market, and not thinking so much about the long term, because nobody is so sure about the long term liquidity. We are already perhaps 3/4 way a messy situation. 3/4 way I mean is that because we are already spending almost 70-75 shillings for every 100 shillings we are collecting on debt repayment. But looking ahead, we have quite a number of interest payments for international bonds that we have taken, but also we have quite some significant domestic payments that we need to be making between 2023 and 2024. So it is clear that in the coming months we will have to spend much more on debt servicing, on repayment of debt. And that means, one, we have to either make every effort to collect more in terms of taxes. Our sense is that we are reaching the limits of how much you can collect, because also tax collection is a factor, over and above efficiencies, it's a factor of economic activity, which is also not as high, because when the cost of things like electricity, energy costs are very high, supplies, shortage of forex, the way it is. So the future doesn't look very good in terms of the kind of payments we have to, unless one, we either restructure them, some of which is essentially declare that we are defaulting, and then now enter into an agreement of how we want to go about it, or we significantly cut public expenditure. And public expenditure, especially on perhaps infrastructure projects that can wait a bit, so that then we don't cut on service delivery. But the options, but then thirdly, is to perhaps there will also be quite some push, because we also are spending quite a bit on importing food and other essential supplies, and with Kenya shilling weakening, then it means that already without that balancing of how much expenditure we are incurring versus how much debt we have to pay, then the future is likely to be very, very, very tough. Treasury owes Kenyans, first of all, full transparency of what are the kind of commitments we have entered. We still don't have the full details of what are the conditions of some of the loans that we have taken. What are some of the measures being taken? If it is a debt register, the latest numbers we have are as of 2021, June of 2021. We need full transparency, but more importantly, it's time to make tough calls. I think Treasury has no option but to help the country make very tough calls, which means significantly reducing and cutting certain expenditures, so that then, especially expenditures that can wait, for us to just jump over this current scenario, so that then we can try to stretch the shilling to the extent that is practically possible. Parliament, as the one with the responsibility, I think it is time for them to rise to the occasion. And we elected them as our representatives. They have a responsibility at this very critical time to say that there are things that we are going to approve. So for instance, I don't see why our deficit should go up, at this kind of season. It's time for us even to advise the executive. Perhaps it's not time to create new offices. It's not time perhaps to implement any large-scale changes that I just introduced new overheads, as it were, but to try. But thirdly, it's extremely important at this point to rationalize and to make tough decisions about what to do with state corporations. State corporations spend about a third of our budget. A lot of the spending and a lot of the public guaranteed debt that has put us where we are is by state corporations. And therefore it's time to make decisions on institutions, and there are over 300 state corporations, some fairly big, some fairly small. The recommendations are out there, and whether it is a greater privatization of some of those state corporations, or you sell some of them, or it's basically winding up of others, that is a decision that will definitely have to be made, and Parliament will definitely have to be. As for citizens and civil society organizations and actors in the media, our job is to constantly call out these issues, constantly put the necessary pressure, especially on Parliament, writing to our members of Parliament, asking them to ask questions so that then they can make decisions and know that somebody is watching. Government will have to, to be very clear, to be very firm on the kind of commitments they are getting into right now. Because right now we are not necessarily, we are trying just to make sure that we are able to go through and manage through the season, because it's not necessarily that you can do, because as I've said, we did not get here by surprise. It was a gradual process, and we will have to incur this cost. Then there's going to be a period of relief, and then we have again another huge payouts coming. So prudence at this point is critical. Stewardship of every shilling to the best of the ability is extremely critical right now.